Certainly, it was a blast.
Yeah.
And the costume contest was crazy. The person who won had like giant, like 15-foot spanning wings, like functional.
Dressed as
Functional.
what?
It appeared to be a biblically accurate angel.
With the eyes?
Kind of, sort of.
Okay.
They didn't exactly like do the eye makeup, but they had like a whole bunch of stuff over their face.
But it
So,
obviously was still really good because it won.
yeah, it was insane. So yeah, congrats to whoever that is that won the costume contest.
Did they make them?
I think so. Or if they didn't, they got it from someone that was worthy enough of being on that stage. So
That is wild.
yeah, it was.
How do you even bring those to Man Ray?
They must have either walked there or gotten an Uber XL. I don't know.
If you're watching, I want to know.
But it's like, call in.
Can you imagine? Live callers to the Bossi Boots pod?
I wish. If somebody called in, they would probably have the most ridiculous things to say to me.
You would get prank called, I feel like.
Hello, chicken. It is me, Bossi Boots, out of drag today, and welcome back to the Chicken Coop, your backstage pass into the ever-changing world of drag production. Now, today in the studio, we have someone who is a staple in the Boston drag scene. He is the curator of the interactive one-night-only drag competition called Serve Sibling. He is the producer behind several theatrical-style drag shows, and the head bitch in charge of Lorenzone Theatrics. And finally, last but not least, he is the artist formerly known as Robin from HR. Please give it up for Nerkolaus, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
That was a lovely intro. That was so kind.
I try to do my research. I do.
You were on it. I was like, oh, keep going.
I know. I feel like the introduction is like the part to really highlight. Like, okay, this is the TLDR. Now we got you hooked. You know.
The Leo in me loved every second.
But yeah, tell us about yourself. Who is Nerkolaus, and what do you do in the Boston drag scene? What's going on with you?
So I lived in Boston for 7 years. I moved here. So I started drag in Western Massachusetts.
Oh wow.
In like Springfield.
I was about to say like Springfield. Yeah.
So I worked at I work in education during the day, which is like a fierce juxtaposition to nightlife.
I love it. I love it when drag artists or like people involved in the drag scene are educators. I love it.
So I went to school for theater, was a theater teacher.
Yep.
Worked at a school out there. I did drag online after I graduated college.
Got you.
And that's where I started. And then I moved to Western Mass, and I became friends with Ivana. Shout out to Ivana. She lives in Connecticut now. She was on Camp Wanakiki season 2.
Come on.
Yeah, come through. She was going to hate that I said that. Specifically said last weekend you didn't like talking about it. Sorry, girl. But I met Ivana, and she brought me out. And I just started doing like local competitions out there, and then I knew I wanted to move to Boston. So after a couple years out there, I moved here and was doing drag, working at a school, and really just like dove into it for a long time.
Yeah.
Like very much Robin from HR was a brand, a character. She was stupid. I was making mixes for a lot of people.
I have heard so many stories. Now this is gonna sound heinous.
Okay.
But to those of you who don't know, Robin from HR basically dipped out from the drag scene before Bossi Boots was born.
Yes.
So I've heard many a story still ringing through the chambers.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I quit like almost 2 years ago now, and people will come up to me and they're like, I remember when you did this like, specific number.
Oh yeah, talking about like it was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, or no, like they remembered everything. Like I did this number at Machine, which is now closed, RIP.
Yes.
For the competition where I did fruit salad by the Wiggles, but it was a tutorial on how to make ham salad, and then I threw it at people. Literally like threw it at people. There's a video.
That is fierce.
where I like flung ham salad in someone's face. I was eating it, like I was deranged. But like people will come up to me and be like, I remember when you covered me in ham salad. And I'm like, sorry, girl. Like
ham salad.
It just
oh my God, I'm dying.
It just kept happening. And then the pandemic happened.
Yes.
And that made drag like hard to do.
Yeah, like that's one thing. Like I remember, like at this point, I was already friends with like Harlow.
Yeah.
At this rate, so seeing like, okay, yeah, there's no place to go. How can we do digital drag? And it's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, and I was lucky because I did drag online to start. So there was a year, my first year of doing drag, I did drag online.
Yeah.
Exclusively. As like a very baby version of like.
We all start somewhere.
Yeah, but it's immortalized on the internet.
Oh, so yeah,
so it's one of those things where it's like, yikes.
So it's like, do I want proof of this existing? But
and at this point, it's almost like 10 years ago that I was doing that.
Yeah.
But so I had an advantage when we went to digital drag because I knew how to like film a lip sync video. I knew that you overlay your music. I knew that like you had to match your lips to your to the songs. Like it was very much unlocking something in me that I hadn't had for a while.
Yeah, it was like riding a bike almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was fun to do at first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, like it rang some nostalgia at first, but obviously it didn't last that long.
Well, it also like you're putting together this number over the course of several weeks sometimes.
Yeah.
And like the shows, if they had a low attendance, you got like a $2 Venmo. And it was very like discouraging to do drag during the pandemic. And then I'm really good friends with Candy Dish, who runs the Gauntlet. Shout out to Candy.
Hi, Candy.
And during the pandemic, I got really invested in playing internet games.
Internet games?
Sounds crazy as like a
like cool math games?
No. So like as like there's a whole community online of people who are fans of like Big Brother, Survivor,
got you, yes.
These reality competition shows.
Yes.
And there's a community of people who during the pandemic developed these things to be played through like Zoom and StreamYard. And they would host them like every day. And you found them through Twitter. And it would be like 30 people who just ran through a StreamYard room. So like StreamYard is different like chat rooms essentially.
Yes.
And you would be dumped into one with 5 other people and a moderator.
Yeah.
And there's like 4 other rooms you can go to. And you just talk to people. And then at the end of 5 minutes, they'd be like, vote 2 people out. And then those 2 people would go, it was called banishment. Those 2 people would go to a Twitch stream in front of an audience of sometimes like, at one point it was like over 1,000 people were watching us play these games online. Well, if you think about 30 people play a night. So it's like a lot of like their network of people. They're like, oh, I'm doing this weird thing. Come watch.
So yeah, it's one of those things where like a word of mouth almost passes the word along. Like, oh, I'm doing this. Watch, and then they tell their friends.
And the audience would save someone in the Twitch stream, and that person would go back and keep playing the game until it was played out over the course of like I sat in front of that computer the time I made it towards the end. Like 8 hours at one point.
Oh my God.
Like I would get out of work and it would start at like 6 and you would be playing this game until like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I told Candy about them and I was like, you should try it. And so she was like, okay, I'll try it. And so she played it and she was like, we could be doing this and we could be making money off of doing this. And I was like, what? And she was like, I think this is like a really sellable Zoom game. So we started testing it. We like invited local drag people to like just like, do you want to play this internet game? We're trying to get it down to 2 hours. It's through Zoom. You just like come in. So,
I did not realize that that was sort of how it all started.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear. For those of you who don't know, Serve Sibling is a one-night drag competition. It is inspired by Big Brother, and previously there were also versions of it called Survivor. Obviously, pun intended for Survivor. It's just like a one-night competition for social strategy games with drag artists, and now audience members get involved too, because we have some amazing regulars in the Boston drag scene. Chris Muchata, we're talking to you. But yeah, tell us more about that. I would love to hear more about maybe like even more memories of the show, like how it got to being from online to the stage. Like, what was that transition like? You were just talking about it.
It was It was really manic at first because I was like, I want to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Because online, you kind of like people were watching for hours. So
Yeah,
you didn't need to
absolutely.
kind of get the time down. We would try, but like people were engaged no matter what to see who won.
Yeah, and also during the pandemic, they really didn't have that much
Yes.
better things to do.
There was nowhere to
So,
go.
yeah.
It was easy to turn on and have as background noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were doing like puzzles and like different like vote out competitions.
Sure.
And so I started to sit with it and was like, how do I make it work on stage? And so we tried the first one, Survivor, and we did it exactly as we did it online.
Yeah.
You might as well have thought that I locked the basement door of Jacques and wouldn't let people leave. They were down there for 4.5 hours.
Oh, damn.
The audience was mad at me.
Oh, my God.
Like the people of the show. Because what I did was, well, it had to be also a drag show. So
Yeah.
every person, as they got eliminated, did a number.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so yeah, that
So
that
it was like,
lengthens
here's
the
a little
show.
challenge. They vote someone out. Now that person's going to do a number.
Yeah.
And then it repeated itself until
Yeah.
the end. So it just went on too long.
It stacks up. I've talked about this previously on the podcast too. Like when you're going to make a show, it's important to slim down the ideas. I feel like this is a very good example of that. Being able to trim something down and be like, okay, let's focus on one concept. here.
Exactly.
So
And that's like, my issue was I wanted people to make money.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
That's been my whole thing. Like, from when I did drag and was producing events, doing drag, and now producing events as someone who doesn't do drag, my goal at the end of the day is to ensure everyone a bag. Like, my goal
Yeah.
at the end of the day is like, I want people to be paid, and I want people to enjoy what is being put out there
Absolutely.
in an engaging way.
Yes.
And the second I found out that people did not have fun at my 4-hour extravaganza, I was very like, okay, we got to work this out. So then I started to be like, oh, we'll cast less people. So we tried it with a lot less people. And it was still too long. It was like, at that point, like 3 hours. And so I was like, okay, we got to like cut the numbers. Like, cut the numbers. And then I came up with this whole like exile thing where I was like, oh, they'll lip sync against each other to like save themselves.
Yep.
And so then it turned into that. So that was the drag show part of it. And then it was like over time, I was like, Survivor's kind of boring now. Like it's formulaic. People show up. They get put into teams. They know what's going to happen at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
And I also like, so Candy, when we came up with it online, was the Survivor girl. So like I am, it is all a facade because Candy is the Survivor girl. And people will come up to me and they'll be like, did you watch last night's Survivor? And I'm like, oh yeah, girl, it was great. Like I very much am like I interact with it on Twitter. Like I know what I'm talking about. I have never, I will stare into the camera and say this. I maybe have watched one episode of Survivor in my life. One.
Clocked. Clocked, mama.
So it was never my thing, but I love Big Brother. Like,
yeah.
And so I went, well, how do I now make it what I actually want to watch?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like now that I know a formula to make it get over in 2 hours. Like every time that it happens, we're done in 2 hours. Thankfully.
I say, we were done in like 2 hours when I did it.
Yeah. It's like, it's very much like, well, and that was the other thing when more people wanted to do it. And so that's when I came up with like, oh, if it's Serve Sibling, the lip syncs are a little more optional.
Yeah.
Then people who don't do drag, it's more accessible for them to also join in and have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I tapped into that community of people I met during the pandemic. So Addison, for example, shout out to Addison.
Hi, Addison. We love you.
I met Addison from that world of stuff. Like, I don't know if Addison ever like played those games, but that's how Addison and I started to like follow each other and and became friends through that experience. And Addison was like, I have a lot of people who would love to come do your game in the basement. And I was
absolutely.
Like, oh, so let's do it. And that's when I combined it with just like, I'm basically like, if you're a queer individual, an ally of the community, a performer, an entertainer, like, and you want to just come play, you'll make $5. I'm sure at the end of the door split, like it will be $5. But if you win, you get $100.
Yes.
But like everyone who leaves has told me they had fun. And that has been the big thing. Like, did you enjoy it?
Yeah. Oh, I had a great time with it when I did it. And I can't wait to do it again on December 20th. You can find me at Jacques Cabaret for Serve Sibling 6. Yeah. But I think something else that's super noteworthy, like hearing you talk about this, like I think that's another really good almost teaching lesson to some people
Mhm.
in the industry is that, like, you know, the first show isn't going to be perfect. No. Like, I think it's so respectable and admirable that you acknowledged, like, okay, I have some work here, and it's an uphill battle. Like, what is, like, the most difficult part when you're trying to buy an audience back? Like, okay, I kind of flubbed this time. Like, what's your tactic when you're like, okay, what can I do to fix this to make it better for audiences going forward and buy these people back?
My biggest thing has been acknowledging what didn't work. So I'm also very transparent with people. So, like, if people asked me, like, oh, I came, but it was so long, I'm like, oh, the next one will not be like that. Like,
Yeah.
I very much am like a yapper. And I like I engage. Like, people who come to my show, I try to talk to them. Like,
Yeah.
I go into the audience, like, I think being trained from a world of drag and being an entertainer, like,
yeah. You still work the room.
Exactly. It's your event. Like,
exactly.
It's at the end of the day, that's what you have to remember. And so it's like, know your audience in a way where you can also be like comfortable being honest about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And be like, well, come watch it again.
For sure.
Like,
Are you taking notes?
Like, just try it again. Like, you just interact with people and really, I think proving that you are listening is the biggest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I feel like there's definitely been some situations where I've been like, hey, I'm definitely going to do this different next time, even on like a performer basis, telling people like, I recently had one of my shows switch venues, and I was like, hey, I would love to have you again. We have better accommodations at this new venue that we didn't have the first time. And that gets the performers to buy back in, which therefore is like, they tell their friends, they have an audience, they get people to come to the show. So it comes full circle.
It comes back around, and that's the thing is, like, that first 4-hour show, a lot of people did not come back immediately.
Yeah,
like,
of course not. Yeah.
But some people did and told the people who didn't come back, oh, no, it was much better, much more organized, much more streamlined. Sure. And then you get the people who may have skipped one come back again.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's like, and like you were saying, being accommodating, like if a performer was like, I didn't have a good time, I'm like, well, what didn't you like about it? Because I want to like fix that now.
Yeah, oh my God, I wish that more like drag artists, I wish that this was more common practice, because I'm kind of the same way. Like, I really love to focus on like the performer experience and like what goes on backstage. Like, I don't want a toxic environment. I don't want people to feel pressure when they're on stage. I want them to just enjoy themselves. Like, even if it's a competition, like this past weekend, I hosted a small like one-night drag competition.
The Boots at the Mill competition, right?
What
did we call that one?
It was called SmackDown Boots.
Oh, okay, SmackDown
Boots. Yes. Congratulations to Lulu Levity for winning.
Love that.
But even
another Big Brother super fan.
Yes, absolutely.
I learned recently.
Yes. But yeah, like even at that show, like I made it very clear, like from the jump, even just in the group chat, being like, hey, this is a competition, but also like we're all working hard, we're all doing the same things. And even like saying that on the mic to the audience is also important, so that way they can still like be supportive and cheer for the artists that are performing for them actively, even though it's a competition. So
Serve Sibling it's interesting to figure out accommodating people, because it is so competition based and so it's social, right? And people come in with their own stuff.
Yep.
And there's already dynamics because people know each other, people don't know each other. You kind of have to like, you're accommodating like the base level, like, are you having a good time? But also like, is it getting too personal? Like,
ooh,
do you know what I mean?
Like I don't want any like weird beef going on.
And
like
that was the issue in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we did Survivor Providence, and y'all took it far too seriously, and I told y'all this from the beginning.
What is that, taking it too seriously?
They had like Zoom calls weeks in advance.
What?
To talk through like plans and what they were going to do and who they were going to vote for and how they were going to vote. And like I drove Akira Oni there, and Akira got a phone call from someone else trying to pregame everything and tell Akira who to vote for and like how it was going to go.
Oh my God.
And they took it far too seriously. And then they had actual like feuds after.
That is crazy.
Like people were angry. And I was like at one point we did that whole like, I do this round where I'm like, who would you vote out next with the whiteboard?
Oh, yes.
And they all said one person, and the person throws the whiteboard on the ground and stormed off stage. I was like, and it was a real like personal moment. And I was like,
okay.
oh, you you have to kind of check in with people in this type of environment of like, are you good? Are you taking it too? Like I always ask people, like, that's why when like I make those chats months in advance, I'm like, this is meant to be fun.
Yes,
Please
absolutely.
don't like that's why I now have like this document of like, this isn't serious. Like,
Yeah,
you just learn these songs and do these things. Like,
I think that's a really responsible thing as a producer too, is like laying the foundation for what the vibe of the show is supposed to be. I think that that's really, really just the responsible thing to do. Like, if you're not doing that, then you're asking for this kind of trouble to happen.
exactly.
And sometimes you have to learn it through shared experiences. Like, obviously, that was like an uphill battle as well. But like being able to set the tone and like let people know, like, hey, we're here to have fun. Please don't take this too seriously. I feel like that already is a big help, but obviously people are going to do what they want to. Drag queens can be petty.
Yeah.
Me included.
And sometimes people are petty when it's happening, and then later I check in with them like the last one when they weren't being petty, but Candace Persuasion was wrestling for a lunch tray with Drake. And
yes, I remember.
They were on the ground, and at one point, like, Candace just shoves him to the ground, and and I literally was like, and like during intermission, I was like, "Are both of you okay?"
Just like, do I need waivers
I
next
was like,
time?
that's what I literally said. I was like, "Do I need like a waiver? Like, are they gonna start making me get insurance for this shit?" Like, I literally was like, I don't know what's about to happen.
I know, it's another thing. It's just like that's the thing that keeps you on the edge of your seat and also makes you want to have a heart attack in drag sometimes is that people will always do the unexpected. Like climbing on the table, getting on the bar, like something that makes me as a producer sweat, being like, I am not going to be liable for your stupidity. I'm sorry. I'm not.
I used to produce a show at the Summit Lounge in Worcester.
Yes.
And Binks was one of my first guest performers, and Binks likes to climb on everything. Cat. And likes to climb on everything, but they had these lights that like hung down, and she's like grabbing onto them, and the whole time you can just see me in every picture, just like,
just like being like, oh
like
no,
waiting for it to break. I was like, oh
my
no.
goodness. But yeah, well, I think that sums up Serve Sibling pretty well. If you, like I said earlier, if you are free on December 20th at 8:00. Come to Jacque's Underground in Boston for Serve Sibling 6, hosted by the one and only Nerkolaus.
Yeah, that's my most wild one. There's 22 people. If you don't know, I'm looking in the camera. If you don't know, there's 22 people. So I
22 blasting egos.
And I put them in partners.
Yes, you did.
So if one of them goes home, the other one's automatically eliminated.
So come watch me get eliminated on December 20th.
Who's your partner again?
Carry the One.
Oh, that's a cute pairing.
I know.
I literally spun a wheel. I opened my laptop and I just
spun the wheel.
Random.
I love it. Now, aside from obviously Serve Sibling, you produce many other shows as well, and this is where we'll talk about Lorenzone Theatrics. I would love to know, like, when you started to have this separation of like, okay, I still want to be producing drag shows. What was in your mind when you were saying and sitting down being like, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
I don't actually know that I ever fully decided it was what I was going to do. So pandemic happened. I have a theater degree.
Yes.
I said, what do I do? And I'm still working at a school at that point, but I needed like a creative outlet, and drag wasn't really like, digital drag was not as fulfilling. I wanted to do something different. So I started to write a parody show called High School Dragsical.
Yes.
Which was like, started it all, essentially.
Got you.
And I wrote it, and I had some people read it, and people were like, it's funny. And I said, well, if the world reopens, I'll do that. And that will be my goodbye to drag.
Got you.
So it was supposed to be, High School Dragsical was produced under the moniker Dish at the Office, because it was me and Candy.
Yes.
Candy and Robin from HR. So it was Dish at the Office. And we did, I just decided, oh, this is going to be what I do. Yep. And then I'm going to quit.
Yeah,
I'm going to be done. I'm not going to, like, drag is going to be a distant thing. I'm just going to move forward. And so we did Dragsical, and it was very successful. Much in large part to Patty Beret, who I know you've had on the pod.
Yes, we love you, Patty. Hi.
Patty was Sharpay and was a brilliant Sharpay, and I loved creating that. High School Dragsical was really important to me. It started like a lot of revitalization and like, oh, I could do this.
Yeah.
And so Dragsical was ending. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I started to kind of write a Mean Girls parody.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like until almost like almost a year after we did Dragsical. So like it started very, oh, I'll do Dragsical, and if I want to do something else, I'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I kept starting Mean Girls and then deleting half of it and then rewriting it.
Yep.
And like, I just like eventually, and I'm sure you can relate because of Clue. Like, I'm sure Clue was like a
absolutely.
undertaking with writing it. Like, that is like, and so when I finished Mean Girls as Mean Queens, I said, well, if I'm going to keep doing this, it needs to be something.
Yes, absolutely.
So Lorenzone Theatrics was kind of born as the vehicle for Mean Queens.
Yeah.
Again, not really thinking of where it was going to go. And there were like 7 different casts of people before it ended up being who it was.
Yes, isn't that how it goes?
Well, Patty at one point was our Regina. It was just like, it was a very different like, and the goal was always, I wanted to do something fun with people I really liked.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's what Dragsical was. Like Dragsical was, it was like 7 people in a room who were there to kind of have a fun time, but like rehearsal was a hangout space. Like everyone got close. You became friends. Like we were rehearsing twice a week. Like we were always around each other. And so that was my goal when I said, okay, if I'm going to do Lorenzone Theatrics, I want it to be always at the root of it, people who I want to hang out with in a back room. Yep. People who I want to sit in the basement of Jacque's twice a week and rehearse a show. Yeah, totally. And that's kind of like, and get them paid, essentially, because we made good money off of Dragsical. And I was absolutely. Like, great. So then I wrote Mean Queens, didn't finish it for a while, decided to finally do it. Again, majorly successful. It's how I met Chanel, the angel. Hi, Chanel. She ended up coming in to be Regina. Yes. And it just like, I was like, oh, I feel really invigorated by this. Yeah. And so then I was talking to Ivana again, good Judy, and she was obsessed with Six the musical. Yes, absolutely. Very much so. And we were driving in her car, maybe right after I had done Dragsical, and she had said, if you ever do a drag parody of Six, I want to do it with you. Oh, and then just kept planting the seeds. And so Mean Queens ended, and I said, do you want to do that? And Ivana was like, what? I was like, yeah, you want to choreograph and like. Honestly, that's kind of the thing where it's like, you get these seeds planted, then when one thing goes successful, it's like, okay, let's do this now. Like sometimes these ideas just flow and charter into the next thing. So yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, absolutely understand that. And so we did Six. It was great. I loved doing that with Ivana. We had a great group of people. And then I like wrote Devil, and it just kind of kept going. Yeah. Like I don't know if I ever decided it was fully my thing. There were many times where I was like, I don't make a lot of money. Like when you are producing a show, you assume a level of risk. And I don't think that is also discussed as much with people. Like a lot of people will start drag and they think the next natural thing to do is to host and produce. Yeah, absolutely. But you have to know how to take an L. Like, oh yeah, I've taken L's. I have. Like it happens. You have to know that you're assuming some level of risk. So like Dragsical, Mean Queens, I didn't make money. Like lots of people are kind of like, oh, well, you must make good money. You're doing these things. I'm like, there's not. Yeah. When you are producing the show in a way that you want to ensure that everyone else makes something before you do in a way. Yeah, like, absolutely. And so I just didn't focus on that. I was like, everyone else can get paid. And I just hung out with my friends. And then Six, I made money, and that's when I was like, okay, I think it's time that we are making enough money where I could pay these people and pay myself in a way that felt fair. Yes, and in doing so, that also enables you to keep going and improve things down the line too. Yes. Like it's kind of like, again, like this is another form of starting a business. Like starting small and living in your nothing can lead to greater things if you keep putting in the work. It's a very fine line to walk, and like you're not going to get there every time, like you said. But I think that that's super important. But
Speaking of the success, though, I would love to hear about what has made the most recent production so successful. I feel like you keep selling out all these shows. Obviously, I feel like there's so much that goes into it. Like, obviously, from scripting to casting, props, getting performers down, advertisements. I would love to hear about like all of it, like some of the big bulk things that you focus on.
The first thing I always focus on is writing the show.
Yes, of
which I talked about extensively already. But writing the show is the biggest thing. Some of them come faster than others. Like, I wrote Legally Blonde in a week.
Oh, wow.
I literally was like, oh, it's done.
That's crazy.
And maybe it was 2 days.
No, same difference, you know?
Addams Family, I think I wrote it in like a month. Like, a lot of them, it just varies.
Yeah.
The one we're working on now, Bridey Little Liars, which by the time this comes out will have already happened, probably, correct?
It comes out the first week of December.
Love. Okay, so Bridey Little Liars has already happened. Hope you came. But that stems from just kind of a manic idea, and it took me like a month, 2 months to write it because I just wasn't sure. So Legally Blonde, Addams Family, there's a lot of source material.
Yeah, this one is a little more original.
Yes.
Per se.
And I didn't want to fully go off of the show because there's so many layers in Pretty Little Liars as a show. And so I went with like the books. And so it was consuming a lot of that and like reading and taking and thinking about what works and what doesn't and what makes it.
Yeah.
And you're crafting more of a story. So it took a little more time.
The creative process can really take a while to sink into, especially like depending on the ask of what you're doing. Like if you decide that this is the theme, for example, like Bridey Little Liars, and you're combining some of these other materials such as, you know, how can I make an album work with a show / book? So
exactly.
It's definitely a bigger undertaking than just like, for example, like I had Clue and I just used the movie as a reference. So when you work with one source versus multiple sources, it takes more time to sink into that process. So yeah.
And Braddy originally was not a Charlie XCX Dragsical, which is like Dragsical. I use that word for almost like all of the shows at this point. Well, it started in high school Dragsical, and I remember it was in the script, and Patty was like, Dragsical, it's just such a weird word. I was like, it's drag and musical combined. Like, what are we not?
Yes, the Dragsical.
Okay, and so we like kept thinking and like, and it just kept coming up. Like when we did 6, it was 6 the Dragsical. It was Legally Blonde the Dragsical. It just
Dragsical.
It just
You got to trademark that.
It's in the works, Diva. Remember that. So it was originally just like pop music for Bridey Little Liars.
Yeah.
And then when Brat came out, I was like, oh, this song would be really cool here. And then I was like, oh, and then I just started like rummaging around, and we had already cast the show had already been cast. So for me, casting is easiest.
Yeah.
Because again, Lorenzone has always been built on, do I want to stay in the basement at Jacque's twice a week with you? Like, yes. and I don't mean to sound like crazy in saying that, but like, I want to sit in a room for months at a time with people that like I enjoy hanging out with.
Yeah, that's sort of the personal advantage and the liberties that you can take as a producer as well. Is that it's like, well, we want to give plenty of people opportunities as well. I do as a producer, I value my peace of mind. So if I don't want to stink up the room either with my attitude or with somebody else's. Like it's always a risk. Sometimes, like when you're welcoming like new drag artists in, like I can't constantly think about that, and I'm like, I don't know this person. I'm taking a risk and hoping that the way that I am acting sets a good tone for the rest of the show. Yeah, and it usually does.
Well, and that's what and you have to think about that. People who say that they aren't thinking about their back room are not thinking about the social dynamics that already exist within a scene. Yeah, and also. I'm asking you to do a lot. Like, I'm trusting you with something that I've written, cared about, invested my money and my time in. And so I wanted to sit with people who I trust. And so casting for me is really easy because a lot of the time, once I write it, I already know who I want. Yeah. A lot of the time, like...
Totally get
Legally Blonde was written with Wilhelmina in mind. Yep. Much like High School Dragsical originally was written with a Patty Beret in mind.
Yes.
It's like Legally Blonde was someone backstage at Mean Girl said, Wilhelmina would be a great Elle Woods.
And you know what? Sometimes that's sometimes the beautiful way that drag can work is that you hear one idea and you're like, let's roll with it.
Let's roll with it.
Because why change something or fix something that's not broken?
Yes. And you know the people who you enjoy working with. And so that's what I usually do is I'm like, where can I fit the people that I like into the meat of the show, the people that I trust. And then I usually do people that are new to me, like people I don't know as well. I start them as in an ensemble role.
Yes.
Or like something a little smaller. Like, how are you at rehearsal? How, like...
Absolutely.
And a lot of times, like, those people will eventually transition into being in, like, bigger roles.
Absolutely.
Like, Wilhelmina, for example, was Karen in Mean Girls, which is like a medium-sized role.
Yeah.
And eventually was the Elle Woods and now Hannah and Bratty Little Liars.
Like leading actress. Yeah.
I move people through certain things on purpose to try and see how they fit in the world of the show.
Exactly. I think that this is also something so important to note as well, is that it's like people always underestimate how much goes on backstage and like what we're looking at as producers, especially on something of this caliber too, is that it's like, yes, you can work to earn these things. Like we still function like a real theater company. Just because it's drag doesn't mean that there isn't professional value to it.
Yes.
Like having the professionalism both on and off stage is so critical in order to keep asking or expecting to be a part of things in the future.
And there are people that like there are people who I would love to work with, but they're like, oh, I can't make that time commitment. And that's also fine. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I have asked people many times where they're like, oh, the rehearsal process is too much, or, oh, well, what about this and what about that? And it's like, you kind of have to wrestle your demons of like, okay, I'm not going to get, it's not going to look, but eventually it always works out the way it's supposed to when it comes to casting. And so that's the thing I don't really stress out about anymore, because I know so many people in the scene and so many people ask about being involved. Yeah. So like, we did auditions in like December, I think, of last year, or maybe I forget when they were. And that was me trying to find like some new people to fill into some of these, like, as people stop doing these things or do other things or move forward, like I still always have like a repertoire of people. And at this point there are enough people between Serve, like, and a lot of people don't know that is people will ask me to be involved in Lorenzone. Yes. And a lot of the time I'm like, I will put you in this. And so I start them at a Serve Sibling, because it's very much, how are you backstage? How are you interacting with me? How do you like, not like, a lot of the times for me, Serve Sibling is an audition.
Yeah, well, another thing is too, like, again, like these theatrical productions, they're a big ask versus Serve Sibling. You come, get drunk, and vote somebody off.
Yes.
Like,
well, are you entertaining?
Yeah,
do you add value? Yeah. Are you fun to talk to? Like, and like, because a lot of things for me are decided at the smoke circle during intermission. If I'm going to be honest, like, if I'm going to own my truth here, a lot of the relationships that I've built have been those intermission moments, or like, and that's what rehearsal is.
Yeah, like when you're able to see like who somebody actually is, like underneath the makeup.
Exactly.
Like we still have personalities here. We're not just walking and talking heads here.
Well, it's like, you're not like, I know from doing drag that it's a character. There is a persona. Whether you are kind of similar to who you are without it on, there's always a layer of drag is escapism. That's what I've always said. This is like, it's escapism. People, when they're doing drag, are not doing drag exactly as they live their life. Like, that's an entirely different thing. Drag is a character that people put on. It's a version of themselves.
For sure.
And if I'm going to, like, twice a week with you, you're not going to be in drag all the time. You're not going to act that way all the time. The character's not going to be on all the time.
Exactly.
Can I actually sit here and talk to you as a person? Like, give you notes and say, we need to work on this. Let's do this. Let's try this. And like, do I want to do that?
Yeah. It's something really critical to think about too. And like you mentioned that drag is escapism. I think that that's something really important to note. I think for me, personally, I don't think that there's too much difference between like Bossi and me out of drag. I'm not dropping the government name now, let's say, but I definitely think that there's still some layer of like extra confidence that just comes naturally with being in drag versus being out of drag. Like I definitely think that I'm a little more relaxed in nature, or maybe somebody can disagree with that. I don't know. But I definitely see the difference between like Bossi and like out of drag. Like I'm not trying to constantly have the spotlight on me when I'm out of drag and supporting somebody else. Like that's another thing too. Like I hate being the person that's like, oh, it's all about me. It's all about me. Like especially when I'm not in drag. If I'm going to support somebody else's show, I'm there to support them.
Yeah, that's
Oh boy. We could talk about that for years.
Well, so doing drag for so long, and part of the reason I stopped doing drag is because, like, again, for me, it was escapism. It was very much a, like, I'm not really liking what's going on with that when I'm not doing this thing, so I'm going to just keep doing this thing. Yeah. And it's fun, and I'll keep doing it. And then I started to, like the person I was a lot more, got to know myself a lot more, and was like, oh, I don't like putting that on. Like, I didn't like that escapist part of it. I didn't want to. But that's been the weirdest part of life before and life after is like, you want, like, the whole time I was doing drag, I was very like, I want to be seen as like Nick and like Nerk and like that person. And now that it's like happening, so like in the last year, I was recently won the Boston Bear 2025 competition.
Yes. Congratulations.
But like now I go places and people know thank you. But people know who I am. Yeah. And that's been a little more jarring for me is like, now it's like, oh, there's no, like, that was that other girl. Like, that was that person with the purple wig on their head. There's none of that. It's like, it's me all the time. And that's been such an interesting dynamic after wanting it for so long. It was jarring the first, like, it's been like a month now, a few weeks, like, but at first, like that first, like couple days after when people were like, Nick, I was like, oh, everyone, like, people like,
I feel like this is, I have such a good question to ask. I feel like this might be kind of obvious, but like, obviously there must be some sort of like freeing feeling. Like you worked on that persona for so long, and like people obviously still know Robin from HR, always will, rest in peace. But like, how freeing did it feel? Like when that moment kind of hit, like obviously I feel like you're maybe even still processing, but like it's probably like some sort of weight off your shoulders.
Yes. Yeah. I had talked about not doing, like, feeling like I was kind of over it for a good amount of time before I quit. And I saying these things about like, I just don't need that escape anymore. So I like, at first it was very like Dragsical, Lorenzone. It was an easy transition out.
Yes, for sure.
And then once I realized, I was like, oh, well, I can still kind of play in this world without it being everything. Yeah. And that's what it was. And then it was, well, I want to be seen as someone who's not just in this world. I want to be like seen as other things. And that's why, that's where the idea of like me starting to like go-go dance came out. Yep. And producing that, the belly party at Jacque's. Yes. So like, that's where all that came from, was very much wanting to be like, well, I know how to produce an event. Let's do it in other spaces and create something that doesn't really exist in Boston.
I think what you have is so special, and I think that it's an important thing to start to offer to people as well, especially like coming out of the pandemic. We're still kind of forming this like, what is drag going to look like going forward? And I think that you have such a very special relationship with it still. And I admire the fact that you're able to still have your head on your shoulders, be like, I want to be a part of this, but I want it to look different. Yeah. I think having different avenues of like how we can make drag look different is what's going to keep us going forward.
Exactly. And like the reason I started writing and producing and creating these theatrical experiences, Serve Sibling, like the immersive type of theater experience with drag, was because I was like, I've seen, and I love to watch a girl kick and buck. Like I do love like traditional drag show. There was just something that like I felt like was missing. That was like a little more like different, exciting, in a different way for people to express themselves. Yeah. In a different way for them to get like lost. It's like, how does your drag character like Chanel, for example. Like, how does your drag character, who's Regina George, also play Emily Fields in Bridal Liars? How is that through Chanel's, or Charlotte York through Chanel's eyes when we did Sex in the City? It's kind of like I think about Patty going from being Sharpay to Emily in Devil Wears Drag to Samantha in Sex in the City. Like, throughout all those experiences, it's still her drag and her character. It's the character interpreted through the eyes of your drag persona.
Yeah.
And that's what I find really fascinating.
I think that is such an incredible thing, and I think that that's so special. And you know, I really, really just admire the way that you are able to see drag through such a different lens. I think that's absolutely incredible. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, for real. But thank you so much for coming out today.
Of course,
I
was
really
excited to do it.
Where on earth can the people find you online?
All right, well, you can follow at Nerkolaus if you want to see like go-go dancing content. You can follow Lorenzone Theatrics. That's Lurenzone, like AutoZone, but Lorenzone Theatrics. And then there's The Belly Party on Instagram if you like a fatty.
Yes. Thank you again so much for coming on. It was so
course.
wonderful chatting with you. And you have been watching The Chicken Coop, your backstage pass into the ever-changing world of drag production. Huge thank you to Randall and Peabody TV for producing the show. Once again, I love you so much. And please make sure to follow Peabody TV on Instagram as well at Peabody_TV. And you can find me pretty much anywhere on Instagram and beyond at Bossi Boots. That is Bossi Boots, as in the shoe. Goodbye, chicken.
Bok bok.